This video is a follow-up to a previous video that I recorded while I was giving a talk in Bournemouth in England. This just fills in the blanks and gives some more details about what you need if you want to create one of your dreams, one of your goals as a physical reality in your life. One of the things that I realized when I was listening to this recording was a concept that I have been searching for several years. And I've talked about it, I've mentioned it to you guys, I bet 100 times. But I didn't quite get it, I didn't quite say, this is what I'm trying to say, right? So, and what it is a model to understand what thinking is. So what I've used in the past, and this is going to lead into the topic that I was going to talk about today. This idea, you've heard me say this probably 50 times, at least, that thinking is a connection. And so the model that I use a lot is a telephone call. Because when I first thought of it, it was in 1980. They didn't have cell phones then. And they didn't have the internet then. So the idea of a telephone call, that was the best analogy I could come up with for saying this is what thinking is. When you're thinking, you're making a connection to another time, another place, right? Now I also say, and this is something that I realized when I was listening to that recording this week, that now I would say you're making a connection to your past self or to your future self. In other words, you're always talking to yourself. That's what it seems like, And so the analogy that I came up with is like people are used to thinking that your mind is a computer, right? People have kind of accepted that idea. But think about a computer that's not connected to the internet. How much value do you lose by not being connected to the internet? Right? I mean, you lose 95% of it, probably. So most of us use our computers to connect to the internet. So the analogy that I came up with, and like I say, I've probably talked about this, my mind has been skirting around this idea for months, if not years, right? Think of your mind as a computer that's connected to the internet. That's mental time travel. Like right now, my computer is connected to 4 different places on Earth, right? Naomi's place, Greg's place, Jessica's place, and my place, right? So there's 4 different connections. So that's like physical time travel. So I'm connected to Vancouver, South Dakota, South Dakota, and Southern California, right? So that is something that everybody's familiar with now. But to me, that's the perfect analogy for what mental time travel is. Because here's the thing. When I talk about mental time travel, when I talk about every thought is a connection, I'm thinking of a very specific image in my mind. And what I'm thinking of is my map of inner space-time. You're familiar with that, right? It's from my book, right? Chapter 10, I think, chapter 11 in the book, right? That field of inner space-time, right? Well, where I got that from was Albert Einstein. he said the laws of time and the laws of space are the same, right? So my model for time is the same as my model for space. That's where I got the idea of the map of inner space-time, right? So, for example, I live across the street here from this apartment building. I don't know how many apartments are in there, but there might be, there might be 50, let's say. Well, I can phone each of those people if I have the phone numbers and they have phones. I can connect to each of those 50 people. So there's 50 different realities, 50 different versions of Victoria, BC, because each of those people lives in a different world, a different reality, right?
Right.
So, but those places already exist. I don't have to create those. They're already there. I can see them through my window, right? So when Joe Vitale was interviewing me, have you seen that interview that Joe did with me for his TV show?
Yeah, it's been a while. But
Yeah, watch it again. It's great. I'm just teasing, but he asked me at the end. Obviously, this is a big question, something he's been struggling with, right? He said to me, "Does the future exist?" Right?
Right.
So I said, "Of course." And I think what I said to him was, "Can I drive down to see you in Texas?" He lives in Texas. I don't say to myself, "Gee, does Texas exist? I wonder if it, I've heard about Texas. I'm not sure it really exists, though. Maybe if I get in my car and I drive down there, I'll drop off the end of the world, right? That's what people used to think. If you sail out in the ocean, you're going to drop off the end, right? Well, it's the same thing. Like, when I went to Bournemouth, I didn't have to create Bournemouth. It already existed. So that's an important thing to realize, right? Is like when I think about achieving a goal, let's say, I'm going to create this result that I want, right? The result is I want to buy a loaf of bread. So I imagine myself going to the store and buying the loaf of bread. Well, I don't have to create the store. I don't have to build the store. I don't have to bake the bread. Somebody else does that, right? It's already there, So it's exactly the same thing. So when I went to England to do my talk, Bournemouth was already there. As a matter of fact, if I hadn't shown up, if I had never contacted those people, they had never heard of me, somebody else would have been in that room on May 2nd giving a talk, because they do those talks every Tuesday, right? So really all that happened was I had to just put myself into that picture. I just had to go bloop, drop in, and I was the person. I was the person who was there that Tuesday, right? Because they have a talk every Tuesday. So when you talk about creating a goal, really all you have to do is put yourself in the picture. Put yourself in that future, because that future is going to exist. It's like these apartments across the street, right? If somebody moves out of that apartment, the apartment's not going to disappear. Somebody else is going to move in. So that's the physical world, right? And so that's the model that I used when I was developing this idea of inner space-time, right? It's like when I think about going to Bournemouth, and of course I didn't even know Bournemouth existed until I, connected with those people and I got invited to go there. But when I thought about, and I can remember when I first had the thought, hey, I'm going to England. Maybe I should do a talk there somewhere, It was just a thought like that. I had this little image in my mind of me doing a talk. And then when I thought about it, I realized, hey, that's a great idea. what would it take to create that? And what I did, and I talk about this in that talk, so you'll hear me talk about it when I do that talk. I contacted my future self, because my future self giving a talk in England existed already. Right, Naomi? I can see you're thinking there. Now, how did it exist? Naomi? Where would it be on my map of inner space-time?
In the future.
The future, and what would I call it?
Thought.
A future virtual event. Right? So it existed. As soon as I thought about it, it existed as a possible future virtual event. Right? That's what I would call it. Now, my timeline didn't go there. You know, the timeline is the actual path that you take through time, right? So if you look at that map of inner space-time, then my timeline didn't necessarily go to Bournemouth. It just went into the future somewhere, right? But when I decided to do a talk, and when I wrote the email and I got a referral to that lady, Sue Stone, and she invited me to come and talk in Bournemouth, then all of a sudden my timeline kind of went bloop, right? It bent. People talk about bending reality. Well, this is what they're talking about, right? It's like if I wanted to move into one of these apartments across the street, I could do it, right? I could absolutely do it. If I wanted to move in, there's an apartment I can see in the window right now, just looking across the street. If I want to move into that apartment, I can absolutely do it. I'll bet if I walked across the street and talked to that person and said, hey, I got a bet going on with some friends of mine that I can move into this apartment. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to offer you $3,000 to move out for a week. I'll give you $3,000. You move into a hotel for a week. You know, I'll pay the hotel room and all your meals and everything else, and you let me live in your apartment for a week. Chances are pretty good the guy would say yes, right? So I could literally move into that apartment if I wanted to. But I didn't have to, you know, all I had to do when I created, now I say created, I created this experience in Bournemouth, right? Well, I created it for me. I didn't create it for those people that are there. The only thing that I created was me being there. If I had not been there, they would have been there, most of them probably would have been there listening to somebody else. All I had to do was to convince, or even, I didn't even convince, I just requested Anita to say, okay, put me on your schedule for sometime in May. I'm going to be there for a month. You know, I'm going to be there from May or April 18th to May 16th. Can you fit me in your schedule on one of those Tuesdays? And she said, yeah, May 2nd, right? So there I was scheduled in. So to my mind, I created that virtual possible event as a physical reality in my life. And I went there and I experienced that and I came back and here I am, right? But as soon as I thought of it, that situation existed as a virtual event, a virtual reality for me. In other words, it was a possibility, right? Now, the interesting thing is when you create something like that, you have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, the actual details are completely unknown until it actually happens, right? I mean, there's 1,000 different ways that that event could have not happened. It could have been canceled. I could have got sick and had to bail out. They had to, they would have had to get another speaker come in that night. There could have been a fire and, the room wouldn't be available. I mean, there's 1,000 different things you can think of, right? So until it actually happens and becomes physical reality, you don't know whether it's going to happen or not. But when it's over, you can remember it, right? So I explained this when I was there talking to them. I said, hey, a month ago I was in Victoria talking to my Saturday group about being here. Now here I am talking about them, I mentioned one of your names, but you're going to have to listen to hear which name it is. So there's the connection, right? It was an idea. My mind went to this possible reality. Then I, luckily, by a fluke, it's always a fluke, right? It's always a fluke when it happens because you can never guarantee it. But when it happened, ta-da, here I am. I recorded it. I took pictures of it. I took movies of myself being there. I can prove that I was there. I got the receipts, And so I asked my future self, how did I get here? And the future self said, I sent an email to a bunch of positive thinking groups and asked them if they wanted me to talk. One of them said yes, right? As a matter of fact, 2 of them said yes. But the other one I decided not to go to. So yeah, the future exists, right? Now, here's the thing. If I had not done this, that virtual future event would have just remained as a virtual future event. And now I'd be looking back at my trip to England saying, it sure would have been nice if I had a chance to talk here, but I wasn't able to find a place to talk. I wasn't able to find an audience, It would have been just a virtual event. Ooh, that would have been so interesting if you did that, right? So for us, we can turn those virtual events into physical events. And the funny thing is, the only person that knew that was me. I mean, all those people in the room, they never thought about this. They never thought, oh, Anthony's going to materialize here. This guy from Victoria, he's going to physically materialize in this room tonight. Come on and see it. They didn't think of it that way, right? But I thought of it that way. Because from their perspective, Anthony Hamilton coming and speaking was only a virtual event. It was only a possibility, right? If Anita, who's the organizer of those Tuesday night meetings, had changed the schedule, it would have been somebody else, right? So I realized a lot of things on that trip, and one of the things I realized, I mean, I guess I knew it before, but I realized it even more sort of powerfully, right? I'm doing this for me. This is my life here, So if I want to do something that I think is going to be enjoyable, then I can do it, right? And so all of the feelings and all the emotions and all the great stories I can talk about now that I'm back, they're all because I created that event, right? I created the event for me. If I hadn't gone, the event would have still happened. It just would have been somebody else. The same as if that person that's living in that apartment didn't move into that apartment, somebody else would have moved in there. That's a pretty long explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's powerful, Anthony.
It is.
That's amazing what you just said. I don't know if you're getting any feedback, but I'm giving it to you.
Well,
that's
thanks.
like channeled answer that I was thinking about today. I started today thinking about some issues as to how to make greater progress, that I was wondering how to do it. And you just synthesized that so well. Um, to me, I mean, I think we're social people, and a lot of times our time and energy is spent with things that other people discuss with us and bestow and expectations. And here is you having a discussion with your future virtual self, talking, giving you advice about the things that need to do to make a possible future event happen. That is so brilliant to be able to do that. And I was thinking, why isn't my life changing in some of the areas I wanted to change enough? And I was thinking, because I don't do the work of the thinking and the planning, because it's difficult to do that. Everything else captures my attention, distraction. So it's talking about editing. There's like so many other things are catching it, but I'm just thinking this thought that I need to set aside time to be able to have those planning sessions with myself, or like I'll sometimes think like I could just step into that other person's life, kind of like you're talking about stepping into that. But if you do the events as a salesperson, you could step into that successful salesperson's life, and there would be events that they would tell you to do, and then you would do them, and you would be that.
Yes. And
You know, it could
after
be.
you did that, see, the only thing that's going to stop you from stepping into the successful salesperson's life who's making 5 times more income than you are,
Right.
the only thing that's stopping you from stepping into that person's life is you. Your fears, your beliefs, your doubts, your self image, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so let's assume that you do that. So, some point in the future, you're actually living that life. You're making 5 times the income. You're a way more successful person than you were financially, at least
Hmm.
in the past, you know. Everybody around you, well, let me put it this way. Nobody around you, nobody that you're interacting with in your life is going to I'm just trying to find the right word here. Let's put it this way: everybody who you interact with in your life is going to accept your new life as just the way it is. You know, who do you deal with when you're looking for a mortgage? Oh, I look for my mortgage broker here. His name is Greg Andera, right? They're just going to assume it's natural for you.
Right.
Like all those people in Bournemouth, they just accepted me as this guy this writer, this guy from Canada who came here, and he was, he's doing this talk. He's traveling in England, and he's doing a talk. Same as every other Tuesday, Last week, the guy came from London. The week before, the person came from someplace else. This week, the guy's coming from, Victoria, BC, right? They just accept it as natural. It's only me, and this was part of the purpose of me doing this trip, at least doing it in the way that I did it, was to demonstrate to you guys this is how you do it, right? Consciously create an event step by step. So one of the things I said, and I mentioned when I was talking about rewriting, lots of times if I'm writing something, or especially if I'm talking, because when you're talking, you're in a different frame of mind, right? If you're in front of an audience, you're in a whole different headspace, and so your mind is going, and the words are coming out, and lots of times you're not even conscious of what you're saying. So if you record it, then afterwards you can play it back, and you can go, oh, hey, that's interesting what I just said, I never thought about that before. I never said that before, or I never I didn't realize what that means, what I just said. That's the kind of thing that happens when you record something like that and then you play it back, right? And so one of the things that I said during that talk was your future self is a concept in your mind. A lot of people don't have that concept. But you guys do because we talked about it, right? So the more you think about it, the more you communicate with it, the more real it becomes. The more it starts to communicate with you, right? And so pretty soon it becomes like it's like, here's a word you've heard before probably. Spirit guide. Is it possible that your spirit guide is your future self? Could it be? Right? See, here's the thing that I realized in 1980 after I had that dream. You remember when I did the visualization exercise going back, I remembered the baseball game. You remember that story? And then I did that every day for like 2 months. So that connection between my 10-year-old and my 32-year-old, because I was 32 at the time I did this. So that connection between 32 and 10, it got really strong because I did it every day. I went back every day and relived that baseball game and that day, and I tried to remember more and more details about it, and eventually I remembered falling asleep in the field and having that dream. And it was like, whoa, right? So I realized that if memory is a connection, I'm connected at 32. I'm connected to the 10-year-old. I'm getting all this information from the 10-year-old. I was astounded at the amount of information that I could draw through that connection. Like I said, my friends' names, their phone numbers, the dogs, their pets, the kind of cars their parents used to drive, what their parents did for a living. All that information was available, and it just kind of came through. It's like if you're talking to somebody on the phone, you talk to them for an hour, you get all kinds of information. If you talk to them for 10 hours, you get 10 times the information, right? So that's what that connection was like. So I realized, well, if thinking is a connection, then if memory is a connection, then when I'm thinking about my goal, the more I think about my goal, the more information I'm going to get from it. So it's the same thing, right? So now we have this concept of the future self, right? Which I just learned, recently. The idea of the future self, right? So the more you think about your future self and the more you talk to your future self and the more you listen to your future self, then the more real that becomes, right? So people have always had a name for this. And they called it intuition. Oh, I just use my intuition. I think it was Harvard Business School some years ago. They did a survey of successful CEOs, and they asked people, how do you make a decision for something that your company's going to be doing 5 or 10 years from now? Because let's face it, the economy can change and trends change and all sorts of things change. How is it that you're able to make decisions that will pay off for your business 5 or 10 years in the future? And the answer was, I use my intuition. Well, what's intuition? I believe this is it. It's connecting to your future self. Now, people don't necessarily use those terms. But what they'll do is they'll think and they'll go, 5 years from now, what's the price of this going to be? And what's the shipping going to be? And what's the material cost going to be? And, whatever, right? Whatever their business happens to be. And they'll make some decisions. So they're connecting to that possible future. That's what I believe, right? That's the way I understand it now. Because my original idea when I had that dream, and I saw myself at 32, and I thought, I'm going to be a professor, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to be married to an Asian woman, all this. You know, when I had that dream, what I realized was this must happen to people all the time. I'm not the only person that's had this kind of experience because I'm just a guy. I'm just a 10-year-old kid, right? So I thought, this must happen to lots of people. They just don't notice it. And now here we are 65 years later. As I say in my talk in Bournemouth, I'm more and more convinced that that's absolutely true. Now, if you don't have a word to describe something, then you can't think about it. You can't talk about it. You can't experience it. Do you remember I used that example of the lawsman? You remember? What's a lawsman? You know, well, gee, if you don't know what a lawsman is, then you can't visualize it. You can't think about it, right? So if you don't have the concept of future self, connecting to your future self is the same as connecting to your past self. If you don't have that model in your mind, like a telephone call, you know, going through time, or your computer connected to the internet, like I just mentioned a minute ago. If you don't have that concept, then it doesn't make any sense to you, you know. And somebody says to you, "Oh, I use my intuition. That's how I make decisions. I just use my intuition." Well, if somebody doesn't know what intuition is, then that doesn't make any sense to them, right? That's like if somebody says to you, "Where did you stay in Indonesia?" "Oh, I stayed at this Losman Bukhari." "Oh, what's that?" They haven't got a clue what you're talking about, right? But if they understand it, then they do know what you're talking about. So I realized that in 1980, you know, when I was 32. I thought, if memory is a connection, then I'm going to be able to remember this day 5 years from now. And certainly Jessica can remember better than all of us. Why? Why can you remember more details than all of us, Jessica?
Sorry, my internet was crappy. I didn't even catch that. What did you ask me?
I said, what I realized in 1980 was that in the future, I'm going to be able to remember this day.
Mm.
And if memory is a connection, then that must mean that this day is connected to me 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I'm going to be able to remember this. So, and then I said, so we can always remember the past, but one of us can remember more details about the past than the other three of us here, and that's you.
Okay.
Why is
Because I
that?
journal it?
Yes.
Because I write it all down?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I said to Greg, "Hey, Greg, what did you have for dinner April 19th, 1971? You haven't got a clue.
Correct.
But if you had a journal, if you were a diarist, like some people are, right? They have keep a diary every day. You could go back to, April 19th, 1971, whatever date that I just said, and you could say, "Oh, here we go. I had a ham and cheese omelet that day for breakfast." Right?
Right.
So that's
If you wrote it down.
if you wrote it down. If you didn't write it down, then you wouldn't know. But if you wrote down and you said, "Well, I had an omelet on the 16th and the 17th and the 18th and the 20th, so probably on the 19th I had an omelet too," you'd be able to narrow it down, right? So that idea then, that thinking is a connection and memory is a connection and goal setting is a connection. I realized that like in one day after I had that dream. I thought, that's it. That's why Paul Meyer's goal setting system is so powerful, because you specify what you're doing, right? And the Paul Meyer says, one of his often quoted lines is, the only reason you're not more successful in achieving your goals is that your goals are not clearly enough defined. And the only way to get them clearly defined is to keep working at them. So I use the analogy of an architect, right? An architect can sketch a building on the back of a napkin, but there's not much detail there. He doesn't have much chance of building that building. But when he gets to the point where he has every little detail worked out, then he can give those notes to a builder. They're called plans, right? He gives the construction plans to a builder. The builder can build the building. And I experienced that when I was in England, because my original thought was, it was like that long. Oh, I see myself speaking in England. That's literally what it was. It was just a thought. But when I got there, and actually all the way there, but more and more and more as the time got closer, I had to add more and more details to that idea, to that virtual reality, right? I had to decide, where am I going to stay? What's the address of the hotel? Which room are we going to be in? What time are we going to catch the train? What station do we catch the train? Where do we get off? How do I get from the train station to my hotel? All those details I had to think about. Well, I didn't think about those in advance. I mean, some of them I just thought of on the day, right? But the airplane reservation, I made that. The hotel reservation, I made the hotel reservation a few weeks before I got there. So, I have to fill in the details. And this is what Paul Meyer says. And this is what Napoleon Hill says. What you can conceive and believe, you can achieve. And that's what he meant. I think that's what Paul Meyer meant when he said, the only reason you're not more successful is because your goals are not clearly enough defined.